Today we'll be reviewing a brief demo of the Base Operations platform. Base Operations is a street-level threat intelligence tool that provides hyperlocal insights to pattern and trends around things like crime, protest, riots, mob violence, and general unrest. It's built to give you a strong sense of what's normal in these locations that I have to operate in, what's been happening lately, so you can get a good sense for what can you expect and put the best possible plans in place to keep people safe and protect assets. We're starting off in our dashboard view, which becomes your command center for locations that sit within your specific region or potentially events that you're responsible for analyzing that are coming up in the coming months or quarters. The locations overview gives you a sense for how often the locations that you're responsible for are being reviewed and when the last time they were reviewed, what the average rate of change is in those locations. So are we seeing a meaningful increase or decrease in event volume? And what is the average risk rating on those sites? This gives you a sense for commonalities that you might see in terms of high risk regions or locations that have a tendency to sit in high risk areas. All of this is built to give you good data to help with prioritizing time, attention, resources around these assets or events. The threat profile is built to help you understand how risk is distributed across that footprint. Here we can see a heat map showing the higher risk and lower risk areas that we have mapped in our dashboard today. The chart over here allows us to sort and filter by our highest and lowest risk sites, as well as do that same thing by change. But these charts and graphs are really where our users go to start to understand what percentage of our sites sit in high risk or low risk locations, what location types do we have in high risk or low risk areas, what does risk across our regions look like. All of this is often used to build out standard operating procedures across different areas or use cases that you support, starting to map what is ultimately this base score to a risk rating or tiered decision-making framework. So when something is high risk, we do X. When something is medium risk, we do Y. This helps build consistency across a program, across decision-making, and helps build predictability with the types of recommendations that are coming from the team. Now, where base operations really shines is at the location level. You heard me talk about that term street-level threat intelligence. Everything we do in the platform is built to provide you the most granular view and understanding of the activity profile in an area that we can to help fuel those decisions and recommendations that you're responsible for. Everything in this view is designed to help you quickly get answers to questions that you would have when analyzing a particular location. We have different map views that add context to the data. We have different filters over here on the left to help you sift through the most relevant event types in the location that you're analyzing. And then the analytics tab on the right-hand side is where we're going to find those answers and details behind the score and behind the data. So starting in our base score map layer, I like to start here for two reasons. One, it really gives you a strong sense for how risk changes across the city or area that you're evaluating. It also lets you know where that location that you're evaluating sits in terms of that relative risk. I also like to start here in demos because one thing I like to call out is that all of our crime data, not just in the US, but around the world, is modeled at this hex level granularity. These hexagons are about 0.7 miles in diameter. So anywhere you go in base operations to find crime data, you will see data modeled down to this level of granularity that allows you to do not only hex and custom polygon assessments, but radius-based assessments as well, where we can draw this down anywhere from 1/10 of a mile to 5 miles based on the relevant proximity for the type of use case that we have. Now, going back to the data, taking a look at base score. Base score is our 0 to 100 scoring system that helps you quickly communicate risk and compare locations. It's built to be very transparent. So in our base score analytics tab here, we can see exactly what's driving up or down that base score here. Now, each one of these event types is weighted a little bit differently. Violent crimes are going to be weighted more than property crimes, for example. We can see this base score of 74 sits in what would probably be like a medium-high, high-risk area, and that's predominantly driven by property crime. We can see each one of these is pretty high risk in terms of like the overall platform. And then when it comes to violent crime, some of the more serious ones like homicide and sex offenses are a little bit lower, but something that we want to pay attention to is also going to be this aggravated assault, robbery, and simple assault. So there's a lot to consider when looking at this 3/4 of a mile around this particular event venue. So drilling down into the heat map view here, now we can start to get a sense for where this activity is most concentrated. When I go over to my threat breakdown, I can really get a strong sense for how often these things are occurring based on threat count. So here we can see from local police data, we're logging, over 1,000 reports of simple assaults in the past 12 months in this almost mile around the facility. If we dial this in a little bit more, let's call it a half mile, we'll see these numbers go down to reflect that new radius. But again, will give us a good sense for how often these things are occurring. Now we see most of this activity is happening north of Lumen Field here in Seattle. So in the context of this, which would likely be like a FIFA World Cup assessment for this event venue, we can see that a lot of these crime types are happening to the north, and most of the violent crime, for example, is happening in the evening and nighttime. Same thing with property crime, where we also see some of that bleeding into the early morning. So it's not just what's happening and how often it's happening, but when is it actually occurring. Trend analysis can give us a good sense for how incident volume is changing over time. The data always defaults to the last 12 months, but we can usually go back to up to 5 years of data. So if you really wanted to see how a city is changing over time, which could be really important for more of a fixed asset physical security assessment, like one of your private sector partners or critical infrastructure location, you can get that sense for whether things are getting much better or much worse over time. Quickly identifying patterns tied to things like seasonality, day of week, and time of day. So not just looking at the last 12 months, but the full spectrum of data to determine whether there's any predictable increases or decreases in event volume based on those time series that we just went through. Now, as we dial in on threat types, the event view can be really helpful for some of those things that maybe occur less frequently, but you certainly want to know where they're happening in the context of your location. So if we think about robbery, which tends to be more violent in nature, from our hotspots, we can see that a lot of these things happen to the north. Clicking in the event volume is going to show us the actual lat longs where these things have been reported at. So we can see that only a couple of these have been right around the stadium, but there's certainly clusters up here on this street up here to the north, and some of these neighborhoods up here as well. Now, going beyond crime, there's a couple other things that folks find valuable when we're thinking about an event security assessment like this. Being able to layer in points of interest. So for this situation, let's think of like transportation hubs, right? How are people going to be getting to and from the stadium? Well, we could see that there's a major transportation hub to the northeast of the stadium. We can dial in our radius right around that location. We can get a really strong sense for the types of things that are happening right at this transportation center. And this is going to help fuel our recommendations for maybe local police presence or recommendations to travelers or event staff. In addition to crime, we also log a ton of data from news and media sources. So clicking into more of our demonstrations and nonviolent unrest, what we're going to see are different types of protest activity, demonstration activity, and all of these events are plotted at the latitude, longitude as well. So we can see how close in proximity to our event venue do people typically congregate. And when they do congregate in this particular area, what are they typically protesting about? In this case, we can see that there's been a lot of ICE-related protests lately, as recently as a couple of weeks ago. And it looks like most of these happen in the downtown area, which frankly is less than a mile from the event venue. If this activity is still going on in the summer months, we can probably expect, especially with all the cameras on the area, that there's going to be heavy congregation of protesters here with relates to this specific topic. In the events section, we're going to get details associated with like the actor groups, what happened during the event, whether or not there were any fatalities, one or more, typically one or more sources of attribution here to reference in your report if you need to. So it gives you a good complement to that local crime data. So crime helps us understand what are those normal day-to-day threats that we might be overlooking, but we really need to factor in. And then the unrest are what are those bigger things that might disrupt travel or disrupt the experience for our attendees. In certain countries or certain situations, that might also pose additional risk. Now, we try to make it really easy to get data out of the platform. So each one of these charts and graphs is exportable. You can copy it as a PNG or a CSV and paste it into your own template if you want. We also offer our own custom reporting options. So straight from the platform, you can define the threat types and the granularity of your choosing, and you could spit out a PowerPoint that captures a PowerPoint slide, the default report for each one of these analytics tabs, We can get sort of a one-page executive summary and then a much deeper custom report dive, multiple levels of granularity in sort of selecting the specific event types and things like that that we want to report on. So all this is designed to make it really easy to assess a high number of locations really deeply, so that you have the best possible data at your fingertips to make the recommendations that are ultimately going to lead to a successful outcome, whether that's for an event like the World Cup here at Lumen Field in Seattle, or whether it's to help private sector partners or critical infrastructure partners do the right thing and sort of mitigate any potential security vulnerabilities in the areas that they're operating in. There's a lot more to show at different locations. There's always more to get into, but I hope this gives you a good initial sense for the base operations platform, and look forward to the opportunity to dig deeper in the future.